It all began with a strange feeling, a nagging thought I couldn't shake off. My husband, Joseph, and I had been married for 15 years. We had our ups and downs, like any couple, but I believed we were happy. Our daughter, Lisa, had a close-knit group of friends, and I welcomed them into our home like they were my own children. They'd laugh, joke around, and spend weekends at our place. But there was one friend of hers, Sophie, that made me feel uneasy. Sophie was a sweet girl, and Lisa adored her. She was polite, respectful, and always greeted me with a warm smile. Still, there was something in the way Joseph would look at her, a flicker in his eyes I couldn't ignore. I tried to dismiss it as paranoia, but the feeling only grew stronger each time Sophie visited. One evening, I walked into the living room to find Joseph and Sophie laughing together. The sound caught me off guard, light, carefree laughter that filled the space like sunlight after a storm. Sophie, 21 and full of that restless, glowing energy of youth, was sitting cross-legged on the couch, scrolling through something on her phone while Joseph leaned slightly toward her, grinning. It was an innocent enough scene, or at least, it looked that way. But as I stood by the doorway, unseen for a moment, I noticed the way Joseph's eyes lingered on her face, not in the way a father figure would look at his daughter's friend, but in a way that made something cold twist in my stomach. It was subtle, a fraction of a second too long, a softness that didn't belong there. I shook my head quickly, almost scolding myself. Don't be ridiculous, I thought. Sophie had been Lisa's best friend since university. She spent so much time in our home that she'd become like a second daughter. I even enjoyed her company, polite, cheerful, always eager to help out in the kitchen or chat about her classes. There was no reason to think anything was wrong. Still, the moment stuck with me, a small, almost invisible splinter I couldn't pull out. As days turned into weeks, I began to notice little things. Small, insignificant gestures that only seemed to matter because I'd started watching more closely. Joseph would casually ask Lisa, "Is Sophie coming over today? Or have you invited Sophie for dinner this weekend?" He tried to make it sound casual, but there was a brightness in his tone that didn't sound like indifference. It was the same tone he used when he was genuinely looking forward to something. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe he just liked Sophie's company. She had that effect on people, warm, talkative, always respectful. Maybe it made him happy to see Lisa with such a good friend. I tried to convince myself that was all it was. But then there were the glances. At family dinners, when Sophie joined us, I noticed the way Joseph's gaze would drift toward her more often than it should. When she spoke, his attention sharpened, he leaned in slightly, smiled at all her jokes, even the ones that weren't particularly funny. If she mentioned feeling cold, he'd be the first to offer a blanket or to adjust the thermostat. Tiny gestures, but too attentive. Too deliberate. Lisa never noticed, of course. She adored Sophie. To her, having her best friend around was the most natural thing in the world. Every time Joseph suggested inviting Sophie over, Lisa's face would light up, and I would smile weakly, pretending to share her excitement. Inside, though, that quiet alarm in my chest was getting louder. I began to wonder when exactly Joseph had started mentioning Sophie's name so often, or when her laughter had become such a familiar sound in our house. It was as if a thin line, one I hadn't realized even existed, had begun to blur between friendly affection and something else. And even though I kept telling myself that I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid, a part of me already knew that something wasn't right. But I couldn't ignore how Joseph's interest seemed to go beyond just being friendly. Each time he mentioned her name or brought her into our conversations, I felt a strange sense of discomfort that I couldn't shake. Why was he so interested in Lisa's friend? Why was he the one bringing her up so often, almost as if he were trying to make sure she was part of our everyday lives? Then, there were the moments I would catch them talking in low voices, leaning in too close. They'd stop as soon as they noticed me and act as if they were discussing something innocent. I wanted to believe it was harmless, but a dark suspicion was taking root in my mind. One evening, as I sat alone in our bedroom, the feeling became too strong to ignore. I couldn't keep quiet anymore. I decided to confront Joseph about it. He was sitting in the living room, reading the newspaper, when I asked him directly, "Is there something going on between you and Sophie?" He looked up, a look of shock and anger flashing across his face. "Are you out of your mind?" he snapped. "She's just a kid. How could you even think something so disgusting?" I felt embarrassed and ashamed. Maybe I really was overthinking things. But as he stormed off, muttering under his breath, I couldn't help but feel that I'd struck a nerve. Despite his anger, Joseph seemed to change after that confrontation. He became more cautious around Sophie, but the tension was still there. I began watching him more closely, paying attention to every interaction, every glance, every shared laugh. They'd be cautious, but when they thought I wasn't looking, they'd act differently. The doubt gnawed at me, turning into an obsession. I needed proof, something to confirm that I wasn't imagining things. One day, after feeling the weight of my doubts grow heavier and heavier, I decided that I had to do something to find out the truth once and for all. Every time I looked at Joseph, every time I watched him talking to our daughter's friend with that extra bit of warmth in his eyes, my heart twisted with worry. I was tired of guessing, tired of the little doubts creeping into my thoughts whenever I wasn't around to keep an eye on things. I needed proof. Something concrete to show me what was really happening when I wasn't there. I knew it wasn't right to spy on someone I loved, someone I was supposed to trust. But the idea of letting these questions go unanswered was too painful. So, I made up my mind, even though it felt wrong. With my heart racing, I went out to buy a very tiny camera. This wasn't like any ordinary camera, it was small enough to hide anywhere, and no one would notice it unless they looked very closely. I picked one that could record clearly, even in places with low light, and could fit in a corner, hidden from plain sight. I held it in my hands for a long time before leaving the store, feeling nervous but determined. As I drove back home, questions filled my mind. Was this the right thing to do? Was I crossing a line that I shouldn't? But then I thought about all the restless nights, all the moments I had spent worrying, wondering, and imagining things that I could never be sure of. I couldn't keep living in that uncertainty. I had to know the truth, no matter what it was. That night, when Joseph was asleep, I quietly placed the camera in a spot where it would capture everything in our living room. It was so well hidden that nobody would notice it, not even if they looked carefully. I felt my hands shaking a little as I set it up, but I pushed forward. This was my only way to find out the truth. I told myself that whatever happened, this was the step I needed to take to finally have peace of mind. With the camera in place, I left it running and hoped that soon, I would finally have the answers I had been searching for. Days passed without incident. I would review the footage every night, feeling like a criminal in my own home. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary at first, and I almost convinced myself that I was being paranoid. But then, one evening when I wasn't home, something happened. Later, as I sat alone in the dark, I took a deep breath and prepared myself to watch the footage. My heart pounded so loudly that I could barely hear anything else. With shaky hands, I clicked on the video file, dreading what I might see but knowing I couldn't look away. At first, everything seemed normal. I saw Joseph sitting on the couch, flipping through the channels on the TV. A few minutes later, Sophie, my daughter's friend, entered the room. They were just talking and laughing, and I kept telling myself, maybe it's all in my head. Maybe there's nothing going on. But as I kept watching, my heart began to sink. Suddenly, I noticed something different in the way they looked at each other, an extra softness in their eyes that wasn't just friendly. They were laughing, leaning closer than friends usually do. I could feel a chill run down my spine as I watched Joseph's hand reach out to touch hers. At first, it was just a light touch, almost like an accident, but then his hand stayed there, lingering. And instead of moving away, Sophie let her hand rest in his, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The moment stretched on, and I could see their faces slowly inching closer together, their laughter quieting down, the looks between them growing deeper. Then, as if in slow motion, they leaned in and kissed. It was real, right in front of me, undeniable proof of everything I had been fearing. It felt like the walls were closing in on me, like I was watching a terrible nightmare come to life. I felt my world crumble around me. My husband, the father of my child, had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I couldn't sleep that night, my mind racing with anger, disbelief, and heartbreak. How could he do this to me? To us? And with someone so young, so close to our family? The betrayal was a wound I didn't know how to heal. I lay awake, planning my next steps, knowing that confrontation was inevitable. I wasn't going to let him deny it this time. The next morning, I decided to keep calm, to act as though nothing had happened. I needed time to think, to decide how to approach this. I couldn't just burst out in anger. I needed to be prepared for whatever might come next. I avoided Joseph as much as possible, spending my day with Lisa, acting like everything was fine. But inside, my heart was breaking. How could I protect her from this ugly truth? How would she feel, knowing her father was capable of such betrayal? That evening, after Lisa had gone to bed, I finally confronted Joseph. I played the footage without saying a word, watching the horror grow on his face. He tried to deny it, but there was no escaping the truth. The look of guilt and shame on his face told me everything I needed to know. At first, he stammered, trying to come up with excuses, but I had no patience for lies. I demanded answers, demanded to know why he had done this to me, to us. But all he could say was that he'd made a mistake, that he was sorry. I listened to his apologies, his empty promises that it would never happen again. But his words meant nothing. I was too hurt, too betrayed to believe him. I didn't want to hear excuses. I wanted to know how he could look at me, his wife, and lie so easily, how he could betray our family. As the days went by, I struggled to keep my emotions in check. I would catch myself staring at Joseph, wondering if I had ever truly known him. Our marriage had been built on trust, or so I thought. Now, it felt like everything I had believed in was a lie. I began to distance myself, spending more time away from the house. I'd go for long drives, trying to clear my mind, hoping that some form of peace would eventually settle in my heart. But every time I returned home, I was reminded of what had happened. One evening, as I was out, I decided to talk to a friend about it. I hadn't told anyone about what I had discovered. Shame and hurt had kept me silent, but I couldn't carry the burden alone anymore. My friend, Clara, was someone I trusted deeply. When I finally told her everything, she listened with shock and empathy. She held my hand, letting me cry out my pain. "You deserve better than this, my dear," she said, her voice filled with genuine compassion. "You don't have to make any decisions now, but remember that you deserve happiness and respect." Her words stuck with me, giving me a small sense of strength. I realized that I needed to think about what I wanted, not just for myself but for Lisa as well. Meanwhile, Joseph continued his attempts to reconcile. He would leave little notes around the house, reminding me of the good times we had shared. But it only made things worse. Each note felt like salt in a fresh wound, reminding me of the lies he had told while acting like the perfect husband. One evening, he came into the bedroom and sat beside me, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry," he said, his eyes full of guilt. "I know I hurt you in a way that can never be repaired. But please, give me a chance to make it right." I looked at him, feeling nothing but anger. "How can you even ask me that? You didn't just betray me, you betrayed our family, our daughter." The words hung in the air, heavy and painful. After that night, I began to see a counselor. I needed someone to help me process the anger, the sadness, and the confusion that had taken over my life. My counselor helped me see that healing would take time, that I didn't have to rush any decisions. Talking to her became a safe space for me to confront my feelings. She encouraged me to think about my future, to focus on rebuilding myself rather than clinging to the past. It was a slow process, but each session gave me a little more clarity. Despite my efforts to heal, Lisa could sense that something was wrong. She became quieter, more withdrawn, as though she knew something had changed between her parents. One day, she came up to me with concern in her eyes. "Mom, are you and Dad okay? You've both been acting so different." I didn't want to lie to her, but I also didn't want to burden her with the truth. "We're just going through a rough time, sweetheart," I said gently. "But remember, no matter what, we both love you very much." She nodded, though I could see the worry in her eyes. It broke my heart to see her so concerned, but I knew that shielding her from the details was the right thing to do. As the weeks passed, I found myself considering all my options. Part of me wanted to end the marriage, to break free from the pain Joseph had caused. But another part of me worried about what that would mean for Lisa, for the family we had built. Divorce felt like a final step, one that would change our lives forever. Clara continued to be a source of support. She reminded me that whatever choice I made, it had to be for my own peace and happiness. You can't stay in a marriage just because you're afraid of the fallout, she told me one afternoon. Her words stayed with me, pushing me to think more deeply about my own needs. One day, I took a long, hard look at myself in the mirror. I saw a woman who had been broken, but who was also strong enough to rebuild. I realized that, no matter what happened with Joseph, I needed to find myself again, to remember the woman I was before all of this. With newfound determination, I decided to focus on my own well-being. I took up new hobbies, reconnected with friends, and began to rediscover the joy I had forgotten. Slowly, I felt myself coming back to life, piece by piece. One evening, as Joseph and I sat in the living room in uncomfortable silence, he broke down. Tears streamed down his face, his voice trembling as he confessed everything, the guilt, the shame, the regret. He told me how he'd let a moment of weakness destroy the most precious thing in his life. He pleaded with me, asking for forgiveness. But I had made up my mind. I listened, but I knew that forgiveness wouldn't change the past. I told him that I needed time, space to heal. I wasn't ready to make any promises, but I was ready to let go of the anger. It was time to focus on my own path. A few months later, I filed for a separation. It was a difficult decision, one that came with countless tears and sleepless nights. But I knew it was the best choice for me. I needed space to heal, to rebuild my life without the weight of betrayal holding me down. Lisa was devastated, but I sat her down and explained as gently as I could. I assured her that both her father and I loved her deeply, and that she would always be our top priority. It was a painful conversation, but one that brought us closer. With time, I began to feel a sense of peace. The separation allowed me to focus on my own happiness, to rebuild the trust one had lost in myself. I threw myself into work, into my hobbies, and into being the best mother I could be for Lisa. I found joy in small things again, moments of laughter and friendship that reminded me of the beauty of life. Eventually, Joseph and I reached a place of understanding. We weren't meant to be together anymore, but we could still co-parent Lisa with love and respect. The anger faded, replaced by acceptance. He had made his choice, and I had made mine. It was a bittersweet end, but one that brought me peace. I knew I had done everything I could to heal, to find a way forward. I felt stronger, more resilient, ready to face whatever came next. Looking back, I realized that the betrayal had changed me, but it had also made me stronger. I had found a way to rise from the pain, to rebuild my life on my own terms. I had rediscovered who I was, beyond just a wife and mother. I was a woman with dreams, with strength, with resilience. The journey had been painful, but it had also been empowering. I looked forward to the future, knowing that I could face anything that came my way. I had learned to trust myself again, to believe in my own strength. And in the end, that was the greatest gift I could have given myself.